Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have EJ Dionne with us today. We'll chat with him in just 1 second. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So let's get into the big things of the week. I want to start with the apparent Doge backlash. Who can forget the image of Elon Musk? I'm sorry. I should have said President Elon Musk was at CPAC in his very formal presidential attire of trucker cap, black sport coat, T-shirt, and Flavor Flav bling hanging from his neck. And he was carrying a chainsaw to symbolize how he is moving like Jason in the Halloween movies through the government, through all the agencies, and slashing funding, slashing spending, slashing services. And guess what? Republicans at home don't seem to like it. Town halls have begun with Republican congresspeople. I believe it was last night, Georgia Congressman Richard McCormick, whose district, by the way, Trump won by 22 points. He got hammered. He got hammered by Republicans in the crowd. It was very reminiscent of the town halls of 2017 when Republicans tried to kill off Obamacare. People are pissed off about inflation, about losing jobs, about cuts to the IRS. And a lot of people might think, oh, IRS cuts, great. I don't have to pay taxes. I won't get audited. But guess what? You do want your refund checks, right? And you want them on time. So people are focusing on that. Trump is also threatening to take over the United States Postal Service and put it under the Commerce Department. And you know what? Americans love their mail. They love the post office. Believe it or not, Americans love the post office. Farmers, they're seeing herbicides, which are used to keep fields weed-free. They're more expensive now. Steel and aluminum tariffs are going to raise the already high price of tractors and other farm machinery. A lot of farmers are starting to complain about the funding freeze in the United States Department of Agriculture, even though a federal judge last week ordered that the USDA release all withheld funds. Doesn't seem to be like Trump is doing that. So people are pissed off, and they should be. And this is a really good sign just a month into Trump 2.0. When you think of the fact that, yes, there are 47 months left in a normal administration with a normal president, at some point they'd be like, oh, shit, the stuff we're doing is pissing people off. That's not going to happen. It is almost guaranteed that whatever we've seen in the first month is going to continue. And that can only mean that the electorate, especially Republicans, the working class, are going to continue to get more and more pissed off. And I think that bodes very well for Democrats heading into the midterm elections in 2026.
We all need a shot of optimistic Andy. This week fucking sucked. It was awful. And so thank you. Thank you for that reset. I feel a little bit better than I did. And, optimism.
Why, you're welcome, young lady.
Gracias. Optimism is contagious. And so that was a good opening.
I love the optimistic Andy props. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think it's optimism. I think it's literally just looking at what's on the ground. I've been saying for weeks, these people are chaos. They don't know what they're doing. They're incompetent. They're just literally serving the billionaires. There's not one of his many, many executive orders and policies that don't negatively impact the rich and corporate America. And at the same time, every one of them negatively impacts only the working class, the middle class, the poor, the needy, the sick. So, it's not about optimism. It's just, I'm trying to look at what I'm seeing in front of me versus what we saw the day after the election, versus what we saw December 1st, versus what we saw a month ago after he took office. Like, it's not a great picture for him when it comes to the people who put him in office and the buyer's remorse that I think we're starting to see.
I do agree with you. I think that, at least from my point of view, that voice is much, much quieter in my brain versus what I've been reading this week. And excellent reminder to have some level of counterpoint from Kash Patel and, the other horrors that we seem to be. It feels like an assault, That's how I feel.
Yeah, I just want to make one observation that the backroom style guide, we don't use Doge anymore. We use Dodgy. We should adopt Jasmine Crockett's name for them. So we don't want to use the name they want.
I'm going to correct your correction, Maddie. We actually use Doge bag.
Go with that. We can revise the style guide on that one.
But yet, just 1 month in, we are already starting to see a backlash from the right in terms of the electorate. We're already starting to see some, not a lot, but some pushback in the Senate, particularly on Ukraine. I think what Senator Tillis did yesterday was incredible because it speaks to the core of what this party stood for decades and decades, stemming from World War II and the Cold War. And look, who would have thought Tom Tillis would be the guy yesterday, after he bent over backwards on all the cabinet nominations. But we're not going to win every battle, right? But if we can get Republicans to just get pissed off enough about Ukraine, that's the start. We just need a start because these people are fucking whores. They're all power hungry, but they are also cowards. So when they see a little bit of a bandwagon pulling up, they'll hop on.
Yes.
Yeah, I do think the Ukraine issue will galvanize some Republicans. And I think one of the most encouraging things that we've seen is this morning's New York Post cover, which was
this amazing
dictator.
Yeah.
And then 10 more things Trump should learn and know inside the paper, all about essentially how Putin is a dictator. So that's encouraging. And we'll see if Trump backs down of this, because right now the policies with Putin are just catastrophic.
Well, I mean, he's now saying that we want to take out the words Russian aggression from the G7 documents. I mean, he's
inviting them back into G7. I mean, that's insane.
Look, senators are nothing more than people. And people can take a lot. And then sometimes there's that point where you're like, you know what? I can't take this shit anymore. And the Ukraine-Russia situation, I think, is going to be that catalyst because it goes against everything this country stands for. I think there's going to continue to be serious pushback. And because he's a coward, he will back off on a lot of the shit he's trying to push through. That's when the infighting occurs. No, sir, we got to do this. And then other people, no, we can't do it because we lose. Look at the stock market. It's tanking. Blah, blah, blah. Sir, we can't. Imagine what goes on in that Oval Office every fucking day between him and his top aides on the range of subjects we're talking about.
I'm not sure that he cares. However, to your point, with all the people who are being fired, that means that they no longer have health coverage for them and their families. A lot of people who work for the government are not Democrats. They're Republicans. And it hits their family. I mean, just at a very basic level, you had a very stable job. Maybe you voted for him 3 times, but now you don't have health care for your family. And I believe if I can find a silver lining, that's what it's going to be. And that's a huge amount of people who've just been laid off.
Sure. Look, if you've ever been involved in like a lawsuit that's dragged on forever, often the attorneys will tell you, you're not going to settle this until people start bleeding. Because otherwise it's just like posture. Monday, you say something, you file a motion. Tuesday, they say something, file it. And it just goes back and forth. But then at some point, the cost starts to add up. The mental, the physical, the financial cost. People start bleeding. And when they start to bleed, they're like, fuck it, throwing in the towel. Let's end this thing. The electorate needs to start bleeding. And we're seeing they already are. You cannot have what I've seen on these town halls in the last couple of days happening in just the first month and not sort of see it as a predictor of more things to come like that. Because Trump's not necessarily going to change right now. Musk isn't changing. He's not going to be like, people are complaining. Oh, let's stop. Like, they're going to plow through because this is the only thing they can do. It's not going to change. So things are only going to get worse. They're only going to get more hurtful, only going to get more chaotic. And as that happens, I think history is going to repeat itself. come the midterm election, just like almost every single administration in the past, the incumbent party is going to lose at least the House. And I know the map doesn't look good for Democrats in the Senate, but if I was a gambling man and someone was giving me good odds, I'd say under this kind of chaos, this kind of situation, I'll throw some dough on the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on whether he is the authoritarian that we fear he is at the worst case scenario, or if he is this bumbling doofus that we also know him to be. If he is the authoritarian that we fear, we are seeing some signs of that with Judge Amir Ali, district court judge, already pointing out that he's not abiding by actual rulings.
Mm-hmm.
And if they continue to not abide by rulings because their Justice Department is interpreting them however the hell he wants them to, then we have a breakdown of any controls, because we don't really know what the Senate and the House could do. Even if there were 3 senators that were Republicans that got all cranky, what do they actually have the power to do? Not much.
You know, Americans have short memories. We had him, then we had Biden. People forgot. They romanticized the old Trump, thought about all the good stuff they think they experienced, forgot about all the bad. They put him back in office by a hairline margin. So it wasn't a mandate, but they put him back in office. Voters are fickle, and especially when they're getting punched in the gut, which they are starting to. I think it could just all unravel at a certain point. Yeah, I just think, to get back to Jen with optimistic Andy, I think we are like no other country in the world, in world history. I think our democracy is strong. I think the systems will hold. But I think people are going to need to bleed before they really know how to fight.
They'll bleed.
In some ways, people are bleeding now.
Yeah, true.
The ultimate thing I believe in the most is the people. The people have all the power. And if the people feel like they voted for this guy and he fucked them, that changes everything. Now, what do we do? What do we do? What's the plan? How do we fight? That's what we all need to do. Because if we fight, we're going to be talking with E.J. Dionne in a few minutes. He had a column that we're going to talk about that came out about a week and a half ago. And he says, if Democrats fight, we win. That's what it's all about. So, the word win and the word whine are very, very similar.
Democrats are really good at one of them.
Yes. And I think each one of us has to choose which word we're going to live by. I am going to live by win. Others, if they want to whine, I just know that, unless you're a toddler, whining doesn't get you anything in life. Right? It's the only place where whining works. Mommy, I'm hungry.
Not,
all right, shut up. Here's a banana.
Yeah. Not in my house. Ask the kids. They got nothing.
I agree, though. I think that people are going to have to get to the streets and they're going to have to protest in large numbers. Mm-hmm. But I do think that, to your point about bleeding, I think that something, unfortunately, catastrophic is going to have to happen. And it may be the stock market crashing 7,000 points, airplanes crashing. I mean, those kind of catastrophes might get some Republicans in the House and the Senate to go, oh, shit.
Well, look, if you're invested in stocks, if you have an IRA, if you have a retirement account, you're not happy this week. You're not happy today. Dow's down almost 600 points. NASDAQ is down almost 300 points. If you're invested in the markets, which half of this country is, including Republicans, you're not happy. But you know who else is not happy about what's happening in the stock market this week? I'll give you a guess.
King Trump?
Yes.
King Trump?
Yep.
King Trump is probably the most unhappy right now because that's the blood that runs through his veins. That's the measurement that he uses for his own success, his identity, his branding, etc. And I guarantee you that right now in the Oval Office, he is sitting with, I don't know who they are, but it's part of his cabinet, his aides, going, I don't like what's happening on Wall Street right now. Which one of you fucking clowns is going to tell me to do something that's going to change this? What do we do to change this? Because that man cannot have a stock market crash. He cannot have a protracted correction. He cannot have a recession. You want to talk about people bleeding? Okay. So he is now going to be blaming people for what's happening. And when they can't fix it, it's not his fault. If the market continues to tank it the next week, someone's going to get fired. I guarantee you. He's going to have to blame somebody because it's never his fault. And that's when heads start to roll. This is how it happens. And he is fucking with dynamite right now. This is coming from smart people around him. There are people who know that what he's doing is going to tank the market. And when the markets tank and people start, look at consumer confidence numbers today, really low came out, right? It's partly why the market is tanking. When that shit happens, that's what spirals us into recession. Okay. So this is the thing that can bring him down. And this is what's going to cause more chaos because he's going to have to blame somebody for it.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the stock market, unfortunately, because people get hurt, I heard Thomas Friedman say this 3 days ago. He kind of hates saying this, but he kind of wishes that the stock market drops 5,000 points to fix things.
Well, it is a sentiment shared by a lot of people. I would hope that the people who wish for the stock market to tank are doing so for altruistic reasons. Namely, it is the one thing that can bring him down and have him stop hurting the poor and the needy. I would hope people aren't just wishing for that because they fucking hate rich people in corporate America. But look, if Trump sees a child gagging on the street, he will step over it. If Trump sees
the child,
on the child, yeah. If Trump sees the stock market tank for a week and a half, you're going to start to see some serious reversals of policies, and he may take that chainsaw and shove it up Musk's ass.
That would be so.
That would hurt.
I don't think so.
That would hurt, actually. That's a new kind of colonoscopy, kids.
No lube. No lube with that chainsaw.
It depends on the ketamine quantity you just had.
I feel like we wandered into dangerous territory here.
Let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner, AOC, for standing up to threats from border czar Tom Homan after her seminar informing her constituents how to stand up for their constitutional rights. My loser, the confirmation of Kash Patel, which effectively solidified the Senate Republicans' capitulation of power.
My winner is Vladimir Putin, who could never have even imagined what Trump is doing for his benefit. And my loser is the Western Alliance that has brought us peace and prosperity for almost 80 years, and Trump is completely dismantling.
I have two losers. My first loser is Acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove, who, which most people do not know, was for prosecuting the J6 rioters before he bent over to agree with Trump that they're actually heroes and were hostages. My other loser is the Republican Senate, who could not come up with one more vote to add to Mitch McConnell's, Susan Collins's, and Lisa Murkowski's votes in order to reject Kash Patel, who is now the FBI director. This gets us to our rant for the week. So it's official. Every one of Donald Trump's cabinet nominations have now been confirmed, except his first, Matt Gaetz. And of course, Matt Gaetz was rejected because he was an accused sex trafficker of underage girls and, in general, a hideous subhuman who was not worthy of even his congressional office, let alone being attorney general, which is what Trump thought he was super qualified to be. I guess you get cut a lot of slack when the cutter is a convicted felon himself. But here's what I don't understand. Why did Senate Republicans draw such a hard line in the sand over Gaetz, especially when they are totally A-okay with the brainworm dude, the Russian asset, the raging alcoholic accused wife-beating rapist, and Kash, I'm going to fuck you up, Patel, all of whom sailed through the confirmation process. This is kind of like that weird prison pecking order where if you're an axe murderer, you're cool, but if you're a pedophile, you're going to get your ass beat and may die. And I haven't even mentioned the election-denying attorney general, the WrestleMania lady, or any of the myriad bizarre, unqualified cabinet nominations who were also confirmed. But so many of these senators are previously on record vehemently opposing the very same policies that they now have zero problem supporting, such as lawlessness, insurrection, Russia and Putin, and sexual perversion. Although the latter, I think they actually secretly support. We can now only hope for the best with this crazy right-wing extremist cabinet. We're going to see attacks on education, attacks on science, attacks on healthcare, attacks on LGBTQ plus people, attacks on contraception, attacks on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, attacks on generals, attacks on Trump's opponents, attacks on America's allies, support for dictators and strongmen, attacks on kindness, compassion, and empathy. We're going to see an unprecedented vortex of chaos. So strap yourselves in, kids. It's going to be a really bumpy ride. All right, let's get to E.J. Dionne. He is a distinguished university professor in the Foundations of Democracy and Culture at Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy and a senior fellow and W. Averell Harriman Chair in Governance Studies at the Brookings Institution. He is also a syndicated columnist for the Washington Post. He's the author or co-author of 9 books, including, most recently, 100% Democracy, The Case for Universal Voting. Other books include the New York Times bestseller, Why the Right Wing Went Wrong, Our Divided Political Heart, and Why Americans Hate Politics. He is the co-editor of What's God Got to Do with the American Experiment, and his media career also includes 20 years with NPR and 14 with the New York Times, including stints in Paris, Beirut, and Rome. EJ, welcome into the back room.
Joy to be with you. Thank you.
So let's get right into it. We're now a month into Trump 2.0. Give me your biggest takeaway so far.
Well, I expected the worst, and it's worse than I expected is the core takeaway. I think what you are seeing is an attempt to dismantle our constitutional order. Senator Angus King of Maine gave a great speech last night on the floor of the Senate and said that, don't tell us we're wrong when we say there's a constitutional crisis here. It is here. It's not tomorrow. It's not when a few courts rule. Trump is assuming power he doesn't have under the law or the Constitution. He is wrecking large pieces of the government with cutbacks and firings that he doesn't have the authority to make. And certainly Elon Musk doesn't have the authority to make. He is interfering in the Justice Department in chilling and outrageous ways, as we saw in the case of, in the Eric Adams case. And, we have a new real hero in this, in Danielle Sassoon, a very conservative prosecutor who said, what we are doing here is not lawful. In effect, she said that in a much more powerful way than I just did. And then we have the United States seeming to change sides in the world. And I don't think any of us would claim that the U.S.'s behavior in the world has always been perfect. All of us have had differences at one time or another with the aspects of American foreign policy. But fundamentally, we have been on the side of democracy since FDR put us on the side against put us into the helped led us into the war against Nazism. And in Ukraine, we followed a policy supported by a lot of Republicans, by the way, that said what was true, that Russia invaded Ukraine, that the invasion was brutal and unjustified, and that we would have the back of this invaded nation that was fighting for democratic values. And then all of a sudden, we have a president of the United States mouthing propaganda, essentially, that comes from Vladimir Putin. And so this is all, you put this all together, and it's been one heck of a scary month.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and I want to talk with you about all of that in a second, but I want to go back about a week and a half to a column you wrote, because here's the thing about Trump. He's been telegraphing for years who he is, what he wants to do, so nothing he's doing is a surprise. That said, the more important thing, and this speaks to your column, is what do we do going forward? So your column is titled, Democrats, Trump has given you a mission, accept all of it. Explain.
Well, there's been a lot of frustration, particularly early on, that Democrats in Congress especially seemed ready to do business as usual, confirm, nominees who were at least marginally acceptable on the general theory, which in normal time, I think applies that a president, if he doesn't appoint, or she someday doesn't appoint someone who's manifestly unqualified or corrupt in some way, should get the people he chooses in the cabinet. I look back in the Bush years at how often I had written against confirming a nominee, and I only did it a few times. I did it very rarely because I thought, I didn't vote for the guy. I don't agree with his policies. But this person he has chosen is a reasonable person to reflect those policies. Let's fight down the road on those policies. In a normal time, that is a perfectly reasonable position for someone to take. In this time, it's not. And you've seen some senators start voting against, all his nominees. But it's amazing still to me how many senators are voting for Trump nominees while he is dismantling the very government in which they're serving, let alone how all these Republicans could vote for people like Tulsi Gabbard, like Robert Kennedy Jr., and my Lord, like Kash Patel at the FBI. So there was frustration with the Democrats. Now, what Democrats in Congress would say legitimately is, look, we don't have a lot of formal power. The House is under control of the Republicans. The Senate's under control of the Republicans. And by the way, the Republicans have, and I think we can now talk about it in partisan terms, unfortunately, a working majority on the Supreme Court. And yet, you've got to use what power you have in Congress to do two things. One is to slow down whatever you can slow down. And two, raise the alarm so that the country sees what's happening and really put Republicans on the spot. Because the only thing in the short term that structurally can stop this is if Republicans in Congress say, four of them in the Senate and a couple of them, depending on the day, 3 or 4 in the House, maybe less, say, we can't go along with this. We've got to move and stop this. And I think that Democrats in Congress are starting to get the message. As I said, Senator King, who's an independent who caucuses with the Democrats, has been very forceful. Senator Warren has been very forceful. There are a bunch of others, Murphy and Chris Murphy and others. They're starting to get there. But I felt that I just wanted to light a fire. Now, there are a lot of other things that people can do. Rachel Maddow on MSNBC has been doing a useful thing, which, by the way, conservative talk show hosts did during the Tea Party, which is to show people out there, hey, wait a minute. There are a lot of you out there. People are having demonstrations all over the country, not just in really, really blue places, but in smaller red, Republican areas. They're going to town meetings of Republican members of Congress in very Republican districts and saying, this is wrong, and really calling them out. And I think that is the beginning. I think the most heartening thing we've seen are the series of polls over the last couple of days, including the Ipsos Washington Post poll, which showed a lot of unease with these policies that Trump has moved into clearly negative territory on approval. But there is a surprisingly strong opposition, for example, to the dismantling of USAID. And their assumption when they went first with USAID is everybody hates foreign aid in the country. Turns out a lot of the country understands more than it was given credit for by them, certainly, but I think by some people, if I may, on our side of politics, the Americans care more about this stuff than they thought. Than a lot of people thought. You're seeing opposition to the speed of this. You're seeing opposition to mass firing. So there is, I think this doesn't settle the matter. It's only the beginning of it. But I think for people who want to start organizing, want to start going to meetings and getting their friends together and saying, where can we bring pressure within the democratic process, we are for now still a democracy. Where can we bring pressure and how can we make a difference? And just the last thing, my friend, the scholar Theda Skocpol, a professor up at Harvard, did an enormous amount of really good work on the ground, both about the Tea Party and then about the anti-Trump movement. And it was extraordinary what people did all over the country. She counts 2,000 to 3,000 communities where people going to libraries or churches or diners or taverns or union halls getting together and saying, what can we do? And when we talk about the resistance, we forget how much it accomplished. Yeah, it was probably a precious term. We weren't in the situation of French resistors, although this time it's actually a more appropriate term than it was in the first Trump administration. But they helped stop the repeal of Obamacare. They flipped the House in the midterm elections. They elected a whole bunch of governors and state legislators, and they got a lot of new people involved in politics. So we got to do the same thing again and try to find more creative ways, perhaps even to fight this fight, because we really have to stop this attack on our basic institutions. And it's very hard because he's got a lot of power. If you don't obey the law as a president, you really have a lot of power.
Well, the reason your piece resonated with me so much was because it wasn't about who Trump is and what he's doing. It's about who Democrats are and what they need to do. So, for example, you write, it's absurd to say of Trump, we will work with him where we can, when the project on which they'd be working with him on involves shattering the rule of law and making it impossible for government workers to do the jobs Americans expect them to carry out. I mean, it speaks to everything that has always frustrated me about my party. You know, when Republicans want something, they march in lockstep and they fight like animals. Democrats have this insatiable need to be viewed as bipartisan and cooperative. And, you know, when you think about like the Warsaw Uprising, no one in the ghetto said, well, let's work with the Nazis where we can, right? What I took away from your piece is that this is the war of all wars. This is to save democracy. There is no working with him. There is the resistance that you speak of. It is taking him down however and wherever we can. Do you think Democrats have it in them to do that?
Getting there. I think this goes very deep in Democrats. And in some ways, you know, all of us, every one of us as individuals has the flaws of our virtues and the virtues of our flaws. And I think the Democrats do have this deep respect and an inclination toward the basic democratic process. And that's a good thing. And that Republicans used to have a lot of that in them, too, before Trump. That's a good inclination. Democrats are a more ideologically diverse party than the Republican Party has become, or at least the Republican Party where would-be dissenters are just folding to Trump. You know, over the years, if you looked at the polling, Democrats were much more likely, these are rank-and-file Democrats, not the party leaders, were much more likely to say, yeah, we should compromise to move forward. Republicans were much more likely to say, don't compromise, stick to your principles. So this goes deep into the Democratic Party. So that's part of the issue here. I also think there is a strategic kind of impulse among the Democrats to say, oh, voters don't care about that issue. Let's talk about economics or whatever they think is most effective. And again, I do think it's very important to link critiques of what Trump is doing to things that voters care about. And that's why, you know, the Senate Democrats spent all of last night, and Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Democrats, has made this core argument, which I think is a good argument, which is these Trump Republican tax cuts for the rich are going to force enormous cutbacks in healthcare, enormous cutbacks in food assistance, enormous cutbacks potentially in student loans, and a lot of other things that people care about. Yes, it should be linked to that. But the issue of the attack on democracy, I've heard this, you've probably heard this from people, oh, voters don't understand that. They don't see that.
Well, they won't see it if people don't talk about it. And the Republicans understood that. They made Hunter Biden's laptop a central issue. Whatever people's views on trans folks might be, that's not a front of mind issue for most Americans, whatever side of this they are on. The Republicans made that a front of mind issue. I think it's our job to make a front of mind issue the threat to the constitutional order and democracy, and stay at it and keep at it. And that, again, that poll suggests people are open to that message. They're hearing that more and earlier than I would have anticipated myself. And, that's the beginning of something, as I said, not the end of something, but they just got to press the case.
Yeah. And one more takeaway from your piece was how you talked about how Democrats have an opportunity here, same as FDR, who you cited, same as Reagan, who you cited, to talk about what they are for by talking about what they're against. And Reagan did that extremely effectively, smaller government, et cetera. And so you cited regulation and spending cuts, the things that truly do impact people on a personal level, which sort of dovetails back into the conversation about the town halls and the fact that people are starting to have a bit of buyer's remorse. Those are the things that if Democrats can successfully convey that these things are impacting you, don't you feel it? This is what we have to fight. This is what we have to change. That's sort of the nucleus how Democrats can get back on their footing and start talking to the working class. Not talking at them, but talking to them about, see, there are consequences to elections. You voted for a guy, okay, but now you're seeing what he's actually doing to you in your life. I think if they can do that, they can hit the mark on that successfully, as we're seeing with people showing up. And I mean, Richard McCormick in Georgia took it on the chin. I mean,
that was a great moment.
Yeah. I mean, his district was won by Trump by 22 points. And it was mayhem in that room. So I think your piece really hit on something important, not just for the Democrats to do strategically and tactically, but also for the electorate to just sort of be more receptive to now because they're feeling it. And I think that's the difference. Campaigns are all about bloviating and all that, but now Musk is walking around with his chainsaw. People are feeling it.
Well, I'm grateful to you for saying that, because for me personally, that was one of the most important arguments I thought I was making. I will never be a bestseller, but I've always talked about the power of negative thinking, leading to positive thinking. But the negative thinking often came first. In FDR's case, he was obviously running against the Great Depression in 1932. He was also running against concentrated economic power. And he was running against a form of capitalism without either safety nets or adequate guardrails. Those were all against things. Those against things ultimately led to an extraordinary program that made our country better. From Social Security to regulation of finance, to the National Labor Relations Act that empowered unions. A whole bunch of positive stuff came out of that. First saying, here's what I'm against. Ronald Reagan was anti-government, anti-tax, anti-communism. Out of those antis came a whole program. I didn't agree with most of it, probably almost all. I disagreed with almost all of it. But it was a coherent program that came out of the anti-stuff. This gives Democrats an opportunity to wage battles that they haven't wanted to. For example, most people have kind of intuitively accepted the Republican idea that regulation is inherently inefficient. It just gums up the works. It's about a lot of paperwork and bureaucrats. By the way, people are discovering that those bureaucrats actually do useful work, like letting you into a national park when you make a reservation for a hotel space, all kinds of things. Give you help at the IRS when you have a question on your taxes. Regulation is about making people, keeping powerful economic actors from breaking the rules, whether it's dumping poison in rivers or screwing you in a business transaction with the small print. I thought it was very useful to Democrats, and Senator Warren has really run with this, when they went after the Consumer Financial Protection Board early, because they've done a whole bunch of stuff on finance that helps the average person who has a credit card and doesn't want to pay extortionate rates, who may discover that somebody stuck them in the fine print with something on their mortgage that they had no good reason to think was there.
Right.
And so I think that, that's an example. And there are a whole bunch of other examples. The larger one is, and the Republicans learned this when they had the shutdowns, the government shutdowns, which is people actually expect quite a lot of government, even when they criticize it. And we're a free country. You should be able to criticize your government. Government gets things wrong. There are inefficiencies. We progressives, I've always thought, should pay a lot more attention to make government work better, because we are the side that says government can do good things. But when this stuff disappears, people say, wait a minute, we counted on that. That's what we expect for our tax money. And you're already starting to see that happen now, because people are seeing very concrete results from what Trump and Musk are doing that they don't like at all.
So let's go back to your takeaways. We've seen Trump and Musk blitz through the government, the agencies, spending like a toddler in a china shop. And now I think there's at least 45 lawsuits. A couple of them on birthright citizenship and spending have rebuked Trump. And so my question to you is, do you think in the absence of a co-equal branch in Congress, which has allowed itself to be completely subjugated by Trump, do you think the judiciary can serve as the guardrail? Can they hold up democracy?
First of all, God bless the lawyers, if I may. God bless these lawyers, all these lawyers around the country who are willing to go into court to try to slow this down or stop it. And that is very useful work. And they are doing it, and mostly with success. Not in every single case, but mostly with success. And I hope they continue, and they have to do it. And the problem is, the fear I have, is that this Supreme Court, as it showed with that immunity decision, is the conservative majority on this court, is really inclined to lean toward presidential power. This goes all the way back to theories of the presidency developed on the right when Reagan was president. John Roberts was part of some of that. And I worry that Trump actually is welcoming all this litigation on purpose, because he and the Project 2025 folks believe that if you get to the Supreme Court, they are going to reverse a bunch of precedents and vastly expand presidential power, which is why, on the one hand, the lawyering, the court suits, all of that is essential, but it's not the only thing we can count on, because at the end of this process, we still don't know where this Supreme Court is going to land. However, somebody once said, a famous person whose name escapes me, said the Supreme Court follows the election returns. And I do think that it will never say so. It would never admit it. But I think justices are well aware of public opinion, are well aware of where the country is. And I think that the notion that there really is a broad opposition to a lot of this could have an impact in close calls. Amy Coney Barrett has shown some signs of independence on some of these issues. And she plus the three liberals, moderate liberals, would be for. You need one more justice. And I think that, especially where there is long precedent, you might pick up another conservative. So then you could at least have some victories there. But ultimately, this is about politics. The Congress has to stand up for itself. Our friend Norm Ornstein taught me an interesting term
institutional patriotism. And I think what's really striking about the Republicans in Congress right now is they have no institutional patriotism. They are not standing up for Article 1 of the Constitution, which is what they should be doing. But the pressure, those town meetings, might make some of them say, this isn't working for us. You're already seeing some stuff in the press where quietly they're saying Katie Britt, the senator from Alabama, that doesn't like the cuts in medical research funding because the University of Alabama in Birmingham gets a lot of that money. The Senator Capito is really trying to protect green vehicles because they are manufactured in some of these green vehicles are manufactured in West Virginia. So that's starting, but I think the pressure is needed to make it vocal and public. And after their votes on, with very few exceptions on these nominees, I don't expect a lot of Republicans. I expected more than we got, and my expectations are way down. But I think pressure could still begin to sow doubt in people's minds. Senator Tillis, who's up for re-election in a potentially tough race, gave a very good speech condemning Trump. He didn't say Trump by name, which I think he has to, but on Ukraine, there's the pressure can get some of them thinking we can't stick with this. But at least that's my hope.
Yeah, I think I saw that yesterday from Tillis, and I was really impressed with that because there is the early signs of certain senators, not members of the House, but senators who are starting to break
Just on the
publicly.
House is small. I look for good news where I get it, and I think that's a friend once called me a feliciopath because it's very dangerous to try to find good stuff in the middle of something that's really bad. But there were 3 Republicans holding up votes on the House budget because they're worried about the Medicaid cuts. There are moderate, members from moderate districts. They're not necessarily moderate. Some of them are more moderate, but I think the term moderate Republican is now obsolete, unfortunately. But, they said, wait a minute, we're not going to back something that could lead to these steep cuts in Medicaid because, they realize Medicaid covers a whole lot of people. 2/3 of the people in nursing homes are covered by Medicaid. Lots of working poor are covered by Medicaid, and they understand that this will be very unpopular if it happens. So again, it's just even in the House, you're seeing some of it.
Sure. And to get back to Tillis, is that he's up for re-election. This is a big change from what we've seen from Republicans who typically only have spoken up and out against Trump and his policies when they're either retiring or they have nothing to lose. He's got a lot to lose. And I think this Ukraine situation could be the linchpin here because I think it's going to be a hard pill for Republicans, senators in particular, to swallow that the United States is now pro-Russia, anti-democracy on the world stage. And I think it might be the thing that gets a Lindsey Graham or those like him, as we've seen from Tillis, to make a real break from Trump and apply the kind of pressure that we really haven't seen yet coming out of the Senate.
But 2 things. One, the great American socialist Eugene Debs once said that there should be an extra beatitude. Blessed are they who expect nothing, for they shall not be disappointed. And at this point, as someone who expected a little bit more of the Republicans, boy, I don't want to get my hopes up again. Having said that, I think that you can divide Republicans into 2 in this sense. There are those who are so safe in either their states or their districts that the only thing they fear politically is a primary. And the only thing they fear is that Donald Trump will go after them in a primary and they will lose. Now, we would like to think people would worry about other things besides just losing an election, but let's face reality here. But there are Republicans, not enough in the Senate, especially in 2026, by the numbers given the states that are up. But there are Republicans in the Senate who have more reason to worry about general election electorates than their primaries. Tillis could be one of them. Governor Roy Cooper, the former governor Roy Cooper is thinking of running against Tillis. He could run a really strong race. And Kamala Harris actually did very well in North Carolina. Democrats swept the statewide offices. I think Susan Collins has reason to worry every year. And I think this time, I think this time will be even harder for her if she chooses to run for re-election. Unfortunately, it's hard to go down a list. Democrats have to figure out how to broaden the map. I've had the theory that in some states, the Democratic brand is so broken that maybe they should just support independents running against incumbent Republicans to try to begin to rebuild. That independent who ran as a kind of working class candidate in Nebraska did quite well the last time. But whatever, you got to make more of them vulnerable. And you got about 15 Republicans in the House who are, I think it's 50, I counted it up recently, I think it's 15 who are from seats where they won by 5% or less. Those are people who have to worry about an election. And that's how I think it'll break down in terms of pressure. And then there are a couple of Republicans. Murkowski has shown some independence. Mitch McConnell in his final days is trying to make up for the fact that he could have sort of ended the Trump threat by supporting impeachment, and he didn't. He's got a lot to answer for from that. But he is probably there. There will be a few others. And then, if you can get 4 or 5, the situation becomes much more dicey for them. But again, I think there are other paths that have to be used to put pressure on them. The governors we should shout out the governors and the state's attorneys general.
Absolutely.
That's real power, control of a state, especially when you have party control of both the governorship and the legislature and the attorney general. That's a real base of power to use. One idea that I'm sort of toying with is, if they get rid of CFPB, imagine if blue states working cooperatively enact all of the financial regulations in their states. It's hard to do business nationally if some of the biggest states in the union say you got to obey these rules. Companies will be inclined to apply those rules to everybody. So I think there are a lot of openings. There's power there, real power that should be used, and some of the governors are willing to use it.
And so, speaking of power and weaponization of that power, yesterday we saw Kash Patel get confirmed as FBI director. We now have Pam Bondi, another Trumper, an election denier, as the new attorney general. Do you expect the weaponization of the DOJ and FBI to now intensify, or do you have any sense that Bondi can remain or will remain independent, or is she just going to rubber stamp all of Trump's worst instincts when it comes to retribution and his vengeance tour?
I expect the worst until I'm proven wrong. I think a good example of what we have reason to be afraid of is Senator Schumer used some kind of military metaphor to talk about the fight we have to make. Congressman Garcia from California said something like, we have to bring real weapons to this fight. They weren't talking about violence. But the U.S. attorney, acting U.S. attorney, who was, by the way, at January 6th, great. The acting U.S. attorney in D.C. was at the demonstrations that led to all that violence. He wrote letters to Schumer and to Garcia talking about, that maybe this is worthy of investigation because they're inciting violence. I mean, they are going to look for excuses, I am afraid, to start going after people in thoroughly scary and illegitimate ways. So, Bondi has shown, she has supported all the stuff they did with Eric Adams. They are trying to push out, attorneys, including Republicans, including conservative Republicans, Justice Department lawyers who think you should obey the rules. So, boy, I'm scared about that. And, Kash Patel, looking at everything he's written and everything he's done, I hope you see some real resistance within the FBI because, they were very upset about the order to quote, out as if it were a bad thing, FBI agents who did their duty by investigating people who attacked cops and other people on January 6th. And now there was something wrong with that. So I'm hoping there'll be some internal resistance there. And similarly, I think we're going to face some, I hope we don't, but I think we could face some interesting situations inside the military. And you saw in his first term, generals and others who said, wait a minute, there are lines we cannot cross. Because Trump may have this immunity decision to wave around. But the rule is that military people, and they take it very seriously, the military people cannot obey illegal orders. And that could lead, again, to a crisis. Again, I hope you and I are wrong. I hope it's not as bad as this. But I think we have to be ready, unfortunately, for the worst, because if this first month hasn't shown us that there are real dangers out there, I don't know what does.
Yeah, well, to sort of half answer my own question, when Congress people who speak out get warning letters from the DOJ to knock it off, those are scary times. Unprecedentedly scary times.
No, it is. And how much of that look at the attacks Trump has been waging on the media with the court suits and whether they settle or not. What heartening news is looked like CBS Paramount was going to settle with him too. It looks like they haven't done it yet, and they seem to be getting more aggressive. I read a good piece yesterday. They seem to be getting more aggressive in their litigation. But that's another area where you can count on, them to go aggressive, especially in cases where there are mergers that are up or business propositions that somehow need approval. At the federal level, they're going to use that. Trump has said openly for years he wanted to use that kind of power.
Yeah, you've been around this game for so long, so you've seen how administrations can evolve over time. It goes from the honeymoon phase to the very end, and everything in between, right? So Trump promised shock and awe. We're going to come day one. We're going to do all these things. It's like a machine gun of executive orders and all kinds of missives that he's firing and trying to dismantle the government in a sense. I think there are people who are starting to see perhaps holes in the administration, maybe even weakness. Like we know what Trump is strong at. Maybe we're starting to see where the weaknesses are. I have this theory that they are the gang that can't shoot straight. Now, maybe I'm just a naive libtard, but like I make an analogy to business. If you take a business and from top to bottom, you fill it with nothing but unqualified, incompetent people, that company cannot achieve its mission. That's what I see the Trump administration. So that might be the catalyst for the resistance to continue. I'll say continue because it's already starting. And so the old adage of let Trump be Trump. I mean, these guys, there's so much chaos that we're seeing, so much infighting already. So one has to wonder, will they implode? And at the same time, if Democrats can do the things you've suggested in your piece, if the electorate starts to feel the pain of, not just, people who voted for Harris, but people who voted for Trump and are saying, I voted for that guy and now I'm out of a job and I can't feed my kids and my kids can't get free lunch in school or my husband can't get his veterans benefits. I mean, we can go on and on. If they are starting to feel that pain, isn't that how things start to change in a 4-year span?
I broadly agree with that and have a few friendly amendments, a phrase that proves I've been in D.C. for too long. But I think, yes, I think that's already starting to happen. My favorite description lately of the Trump administration is from Jim Himes, the congressman from Connecticut, who said that it combines brutality with incompetence. I think there's a lot to that. And I do think you're already seeing some of the backlash out there on very specific failures. And Lord knows what happens if they start screwing up delivering Social Security checks.
Or mail. He wants to take over.
Yeah, exactly. That's all true. I think there are a couple of problems. One is some of this damage, if it's not stopped early, is going to be lasting and really hard to reverse. I think what he's doing on foreign policy and our alliances and Ukraine is really bad for us in the long run, and it won't be easy to fix. Richard Haas, former head of the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, who worked for Republican presidents, was quoted the other day as saying, our allies could say the first time, all right, the Trump thing, first Trump was an exception, but the U.S. is who the U.S. is. When this happens the second time around in a more radical way, if we empower Putin, if they don't pull back from this policy, that damage could be with us for a long time. Similarly, if they keep aggrandizing power, at what point are they going to insulate themselves from accountability? And that's why I think it's urgent to slow it down as much as possible, and to try to begin to get more opposition out of Republicans in Congress, and really to say, you got to act now. You can't wait. You can't just sit on your hands. This is too dangerous. However, as Stephen A. Smith likes to say, the great sports commentator, however, I do think that what you're describing is beginning to happen. If you have a bunch of incompetent yes people in your administration, in this case, it's mostly yes men, that ain't good for your operation. And if you have people who are given to backstabbing, that's not good. He had a lot of that trouble in the first administration. And while this crew may be more loyal than the last one in being willing to carry out whatever he says, they're not necessarily loyal to each other. And it could be, and among other things, that could produce a lot of useful information. It's been useful to watch Steve Bannon go after Elon Musk. That's a very interesting fissure on their side. What other ones are there? We're going to learn that, and that will sort of be a check on his power that will be useful.
Yeah, we could look at the worst fears. The worst fears are, the lawsuits get to the Supreme Court, they rule against him, he defies that. There's, some cause for him to one day declare martial law, take over the military, cancel elections, take a third term, all these like Hollywood scenarios. But I just, again, maybe it's the naive libtard in me, but I don't see that happening. I see Humpty Dumpty falling off his wall, shattering and imploding.
Well, answer with a cliche: hope for the best and prepare for the worst. I think that's all we can do, because, you need hope. You need, hope is, I could give you a whole sermon on hope, but I think hope is the essential virtue. Because if you don't have hope, love, charity, and a lot of other things are really difficult. So yes, we cannot give up. And we have to have hope that our country is what we still at bottom like to believe it is. I agree with that. On the other hand, as this first month has taught us anything, we don't know yet where he's going to stop. And we have to be prepared for his going even farther and trying to figure out how to, prevent that. So, but yes, I hope you are right in your hope.
Yeah. EJ, great conversation. Do come back soon.
Yeah, a real joy to be with you, and what you're doing is important, and I appreciate it, and thank you.
Likewise. Take care.
Bye.
This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg, and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.